Anna Kasparian's with us on the phone, of course, the co-host of the Young Turks. Tell me about what's going on. You guys cover some of the same stories we cover, but before we get to that, I have to ask you, do you read YouTube comments or not?
I read YouTube comments very rarely. In the beginning of my stint with the Young Turks, I used to read comments religiously because I was interested in the feedback, but then you start to learn that reading the comments is not good for your self-esteem. It's not good for your career. Most of the comments are not constructive, so I read very, very rarely.
I'm starting to get into the same thing because if every other comment is just an anti-Semitic slur about me, you're right, it's not going to make the show that much better, but at the same time, I feel like if I ignore criticism, that's not, something about that feels wrong too, you know?
Oh, absolutely. I think the only way to improve is to really listen to constructive criticism. And I realize that the way that you get constructive criticism is usually through email. So if I get emails from listeners, I always read them, and I always take their suggestions into consideration. But YouTube, I feel like that's a completely different beast. I mean, you get anti-Semitic comments. I get comments on my breasts.
Right.
So, yeah, we both get the downfall of YouTube.
I would kind of prefer to get comments on my breasts than anti-Semitic comments, though, myself. I don't know.
Right, it's a little better, I guess.
We've been doing this story it's kind of a long-term story about the fear-mongering and the fear tactics that are used by Republicans. Glenn Beck recently did a whole infomercial basically talking to people about, you should be scared, so you should buy gold coins from my sponsor. You should be scared that you're not going to have food, so you should buy food insurance, also from my sponsor. And it actually turns out, a new study says, conservatives actually have bigger fear centers in their brains, so maybe they actually can't help being susceptible to this type of thing.
Right. There was a study done by a neurologist from the University College London, and what he found by doing brain scans on 92 people is that conservatives tend to have a larger amygdala, and that is the fear center in their brains. Now, this is a really interesting study, but there are limitations to it.
Yeah.
You have to really keep in mind that, first of all, it was only done on 92 adults. And there's the whole question of the chicken or the egg. Does their political beliefs and their political values shape their brain structure, or is it the other way around? Are they born with this predisposition to be conservative?
And this goes back, there's the liberal gene story, which everybody was talking about back in October, which was the Harvard and UC San Diego thing. And it said there's this DRD4 gene, and it predisposes people to being liberal, but that's only if they've had active social lives while they were in high school. And again, It's also kind of the same question, right? Are we building a genetic persona of the conservative, or are these just the effects that being conservative has on your brain?
I mean, it's a great question, and I think that it's a question that's, better left to scientists to answer.
Instead of us, yeah.
But, of course, I think that it's a mixture of both nature versus nurture. I think that, maybe people do have predispositions to certain political beliefs, but our social lives and, basically the environment that we are raised in really has an effect on, what type of political ideals we form in the future.
I would love for them to expand it beyond the 92 people, though, because it would just be a lot of fun for shows like the Young Turks and my show and so many others if we could actually point out and say, you know what, there's a medical explanation for why conservatives find Glenn Beck so compelling.
No, I know. I love it. And, what's really funny is when this whole study by the neurologist came out, a lot of conservative bloggers took it and they twisted it. And of course, that's not something that we're used to that basically by conservatives. But what they did is they took this study and they said, aha, see you liberals, we have larger brains than you. What about that? But of course, they ignored the fact of the study that said that conservatives tend to have a smaller anterior cingulate, which is responsible for courage and optimism. They just completely ignored that.
It's funny because if this is, let's just assume that there is something to this, and maybe it's not all nurture, it's not all nature, right? There is something biological here, at least a little bit. What Glenn Beck is doing is absolutely genius. I mean, he has the perfect audience to be pulled in by getting scared about, literally everything. The dollar is not going to be worth anything. Your food is not, you're not going to be able to get food. You are, it's just the long list of laundry things. He's a genius in a way.
No, you're absolutely correct. He is a genius. And look, we've seen this tactic used by conservatives and Republicans time and time again. I mean, what is the main reason why George Bush and Dick Cheney had widespread support when they wanted to invade the Middle East? It's because people were scared. And the fear-mongering is such a successful tactic by them. It's incredible. So it's interesting to see that, according to these brain scans, they have a part of their brain, the fear center, that's larger compared to, the brains of liberals. It's really fascinating information. And as you said, yeah, it's definitely a successful tactic used by people like Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh. There was another study done that showed that if people already believe something,
right,
regardless of how much information you throw at them, how much truth and fact you throw at them, they are very unlikely to change what their opinions already are. So, all of these studies are super interesting because it really lets you know what the psychology is behind all of these political values and these political ideals.
That explains what happens every time I interview Shirley Phelps Roper from the God Hates Fags church. She's just, she's probably just, it's been too many years of the God Hates Fags stuff. I'm just not going to be able to convince her otherwise.
Oh, absolutely not. People like that are so extreme in their views. It doesn't matter what type of information you throw at them. They're very unlikely to change because their views have now become their identity, and it's really hard to change that. It's like letting go of who they are.
Yeah, essentially, without God Hates Fags signs, Shirley Phelps Roper doesn't exist as a person. You're absolutely right.
Yes.
Hey, last thing. What goes on during breaks at the Young Turks in the studio? People always ask us what goes on here, and literally nothing goes on. We check our email, and it's like the most boring thing. Does anything good go on there?
It's funny you asked that question. Oh, actually, we have pretty eventful breaks most of the time. Usually, Jake is such a colorful guy. He's so much fun. So, one time it was funny. Our mics were left on during the break on accident. And I guess Cenk got hungry, and he said that he needed a fruit injection. And that means he needs, someone to get him, a piece of fruit so he doesn't lose focus during the show. And, we always have fun. We joke around. We usually talk about what we're going to do in the next segment. We definitely check our emails. We check Twitter just to see what the feedback is. So they're usually eventful. They're usually fun. Sometimes we don't talk at all because we're so wrapped up in our email or whatever.
It's funny you mentioned the mics being left on. I've never mentioned this, but a few weeks ago, we do this live Ustream feed during the show, and we used to start it 10 minutes early. I just thought it was cool. People could see what goes on in the studio. And my producer, I don't know what he was thinking. The mics were just on. And I was just railing about a listener who's been stalking me on Twitter, Facebook, sending me emails. And we were like, hold on a second, are the mics on?
Oh, no.
Fortunately, that person who normally is watching those 10 minutes before the show starts, that day was tied up doing something and didn't know the better of it. But it was a close call,
Oh, that's awesome. Do you podcast your show by any chance?
Yeah, we do. We're on iTunes and all that stuff, yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, you're lucky that he or she didn't listen to the podcast from that day.
Oh, no, we cut that out. You better believe that. There was no evidence of that. We did a forensic cleaning of it. There was no evidence that ever took place.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
All right, Anna Kasparian, co-host of the Young Turks for 3 years already, I have to say, joining us on the phone. Thanks so much. We'll have you back soon.